Today's guest grew up in Toronto, Canada, and now lives in Tanzania, East Africa. She has spent time in over 25 countries. The exposures made her appreciate and value diversity, which also gave her an opportunity to work with people from all walks of life. Her 13 years of experience as a paramedic and 8 years in emergency housing for mental health and addictions gave her the ability to better understand a client's needs and offer personalized service. She experienced an NDE in 2017 that initiated a radical shift. Let's welcome today's guest, Amanda. Welcome, Amanda.
Hey, Adam.
Yeah, as I just mentioned prior to what's going on, just a little bit, we sometimes have profound experiences in our lives, and sometimes that profound experience shifts and changes our world forever. But there are other parts that go along with it that bring us to that particular place. Back in 2017, you had a near-death experience. Maybe you can just maybe go back to that time a little bit and of what took place.
Yeah, sure. What happened was it was August 17 of 2017, and I'm not good with dates, but that's one I'll never forget. I was in a car driving with my ex-partner. He was in the driver's seat and I was in the passenger seat. And there's no one in the back seat. Well, our dog was in there, but we were on a high mountain road in Western Canada. And it was one of those roads where, the mountain's going up like this, and there's a road here, and then there's a drop. And there was a concrete guardrail about the height of an adult's waist. Other than that, you could hop over it and just fall over the edge.
Wow.
And the drop was about 700 feet. And so we were on our way home from a camping trip, and we weren't even driving that fast. I mean, there's only so fast you can go on those roads. And a car that was oncoming lost control, and they crossed the double center line, and they were headed straight for us. So it looked like we were going to have head-on collision, and there wasn't much of an escape route. The only option was to kind of swerve onto the gravel shoulder beside the mountain face. But even that gravel shoulder was really thin, like it wasn't wide enough for like a full car. And up ahead, it was actually kind of getting thinner and thinner. And you could see up ahead that eventually the road was just like the road in the rock face. So our car swerved onto the shoulder and just kind of had like a near miss. We didn't hit that oncoming car, and then swerved back onto the road before the shoulder actually ended. And that quick jerk and swerve caused us to totally lose control. And our car spun twice, like just horizontally. And we ended up crossing the double center line into the other oncoming lane, and we collided with the next car. We collided with the next car that was coming. And then that caused us to flip upside down and then land and rest on the concrete guardrail. And so the wheels were up towards the sky, the roof was crushed, and the front end of the car, which was like the hood and the front seat, was kind of dangling over the edge. And then the back seat and the trunk was dangling on the roadside. It was literally like a 50% balance. And that's where the car stopped and rested. So I had an out-of-body experience during that car accident. And just before I tell that part of the story, I had been working as a paramedic for 13 years in a town that was a couple hours away. And we were all very familiar with this road being very dangerous for cars going over the edge. It was very rare that there was like a collision that was contained to the road and people survived and there was a rescue. And so in general, cars would collide, go over the edge, drop like way, way down, and there'd be no survivors.
Wow.
So that's kind of like what happened there. So as soon as the car lost control and we swerved onto the shoulder, something clicked very, very fast in my mind. Like, it's time to die. It's time to prepare. So what I did was, I just automatically relaxed into my seat, relaxed my muscles, closed my eyes, and just kind of acted as though a plane was taking off. Like, let's do this peacefully. Let's try and go up and not bring the awareness down over the mountain where I'm pretty sure we're going. And so I completely let go into a really surrendered space. And then what happened was something that I've never experienced before, which is popping out of my body, my spirit, my awareness popping out of my body. If that's ever happened to me, I totally don't remember. I don't think I've ever done that consciously. So my eyes close, and suddenly I'm in kind of a mental space or awareness that's all black. I don't have my physical sight. I don't have my hearing. I don't have any sensations like like skin sensations. And most, I guess most notably, most memorably, I didn't have the weight of my body. And, as human beings, we're used to having, like 100, 200, 300 pounds all the time that we're carrying around, but we don't feel like it's heavy because we're so used to it.
Yeah.
It's all we've ever known. We've grown with it. But where I was, it was my first experience of not having that. And the freedom and the lightness of that was just, I can't even really compare it to anything because I hadn't experienced anything like that before or since. So I find myself there, and a bunch of experiences and realizations start to happen. And on Earth, it was probably 2 or 3 seconds in Earth time. But in that other dimension, it seemed like time was working on its own clock, or there wasn't even really time at all. It was a series of experiences and perceptions. And one way of kind of relating to that, kind of looking back, is, if you have an afternoon nap, say you're only asleep for like 20 minutes, half an hour, and when you wake up, maybe you've had some vivid dreams and a lot has happened, and it just seems like you've been gone for a really long time. But then in Earth time, it's very different. So that's kind of the gist of it. So I find myself in this dark black place, but it didn't seem frightening. It didn't seem scary or ominous. It seemed almost like a warm, gentle cave, that kind of feeling. And so I'm noticing that I don't have my senses about me, but I'm also noticing that my awareness is really peaked. I'm experiencing everything, what some people would say multidimensionally. Like, I'm experiencing different memories and knowings. Everything's really crisp and clear. Like, if you wake up first thing in the morning and you have a coffee and it's very quiet and you're just, you're fully there. It was like that, only more. And I realized that I wasn't alone here. That's the next realization. It was as though I was surrounded with what I would call the presence of the all. And it wasn't anyone that I could see or perceive. I couldn't make out specific beings with identities. It was like being watched by love. It was like being welcomed and reunited by ultimate love. And it wasn't just like one being that was surrounding me. It was almost like the highest, most divine, well version of everybody who'd ever lived, of every created creature, the highest version, the spirit of that, angels, healthy ancestors, just everything that you could imagine. It felt like was in this unity. So even though it was like one presence, it was many that were completely united in purpose and intention and identity. And so I don't know how I knew this, but I just felt like I was joining them. it felt like I had left behind the things that I was so used to, my hangups, my insecurities, my anxieties, my apprehensions, my just all the little quirky things that are heavy and hold us back on earth that we're very used to kind of dealing with and reacting to. None of that was even available to me. It
Right.
was like, if anything, like a very distant memory. I wasn't thinking about it. And then the qualities that I was experiencing of myself there were innocence, freedom, purity, gentleness, just the vibration of all the goodnesses of me on earth, but without the rest. And I could feel those things coming off of this presence that was around me. And I realized that in that moment, I was joining and reuniting myself and that part of me with those parts of them. Nothing else was really allowed or able to enter this dimension, this realm of reality. I would imagine in retrospect that, like if a being that, is dark or negative or unhealed was trying to get in there, it just wouldn't be able to because of the expression of what we're all sharing there. The other thing about this place, there was this real familiarity to it. And I don't call it heaven. I almost feel like it was like the threshold of higher dimensions. I didn't go past here in this out of body experience. I feel like I was just starting to merge and reunite and potentially move on, but I didn't. But this threshold, this safe, beautiful place, it was very familiar. I felt that this was a coming and going hallway or zone that I had come and gone from before. And I'm even just kind of getting chills talking about and remembering this. There was this element of being fully known and fully understood for all my parts, all my parts of even like who I had been on earth, the mistakes that I had made, the expressions, the naiveties, like all of the stuff. It was fully known and fully understood by this presence. There was no condemnation feelings. There was no judgment. If anything, there was just joy at the reconnection, curiosity, and welcome. All the
Yeah.
parts of me were welcome. And really, there was like this knowing that all that other stuff, those inadequacies and insecurities and anxieties from earth, they or it knew that that wasn't the real me. That was like a forgetful version of me that was out learning, growing, and exploring during the separation. So
Right.
there was no condemnation or judgment or even like holding me, this feeling of being like needed to be forgiven or being held responsible. There was none of that. It was just like an observation, like, oh, the truth of you is back. We're seeing each other again. And so, yeah, like I said, it's a couple seconds in earth time, but it's longer in spirit time, where these realizations and these perceptions and this reunion could happen. There was no words. It was all kind of telepathic, but I would say like emotionally telepathic too. Like I'm actually feeling all these qualities somehow.
Right.
And then very suddenly and shockingly, I find that I can hear again. I'm hearing like screaming from my partner who didn't leave his body and, yelling from bystanders. I heard someone say, oh, I don't want to go and look in there. I don't want to see a dead body. I can feel my body again. I'm like kind of curled forward in a fetal position because the roof had crushed. And so everything's coming back. And very quickly, someone had gotten a crowbar and had allowed us to get out. And when I opened my eyes and someone was like, using the crowbar at the door, I just remember seeing upside down trees going straight down. And because the car was kind of resting on this like 50-50 thing,
Wow.
there was still this unsure feeling that like if someone moved the wrong way or whoever had the crowbar was like pushing too hard, like it could tip over. Like there was this real unknown. And yet for me, I didn't have any fear because I had just been home
Yeah, yeah.
or I was on my way. I was just being greeted at home. So we got ourselves out of the car. It was fine. And while the paramedics were coming and the police and stuff, I took a seat on that concrete guardrail, and I was just kind of looking out into the distance. And I just remember feeling completely blissed out. And not like I was like high or euphoric, but just at this really deep sense of peace. It was peace like, okay, now I remember everything, or I remember a lot of who we are, where we come and we go from. And that knowledge brought a lot of peace. And I wanted, like, everything in me wanted to tell my partner, wanted to tell anyone who would listen at the scene. But I realized, like, no way, like they're not going to get it. Look, they're all spinning in chaos. There's no way.
Yes, yes.
So I just kind of took those moments when we were waiting for emergency services to really be like, okay, I've just been home. And I remember now, not because of a belief, not because of someone else's story. I remember and know now from my direct experience that I am an awareness, I am a spirit that's in a human body right now, but also comes and goes and exists without a body. There's no less of me because I don't have a body. In fact, there's actually more awareness, more crispness, more clearness when I'm out of the body. So either way, it's only the body that dies. It's only the body that sleeps, but the spirit totally is intact in the body or out of the body. And in fact, out of the body, there's a lot more knowingness, there's a lot more insight, and a lot more possibility as far as different dimensions. So the peace that came with suddenly becoming aware of this, or just remembering it firsthand, that was the source of the peace, that was the source of the bliss. And yeah, that's what happened that day.
Yeah, so interesting. So many questions that come in between when you tell the story with regards to people having life reviews when they have a near-death experience, people coming back, seeing a guy, a master, a teacher, or a guide that gives them information. But for many people, they do come back as a changed individual, as a changed soul. And so, from your personal experience, what was the biggest change that shifted within you?
Yeah, I think the biggest change, it's been 6 years, and I'm still, even to this day, I'm still integrating and all that kind of thing. But if I had to say it was one thing, it's that I am just as, or sometimes more, aware of being a spirit and my spiritual nature and my spiritual connection to other elements and qualities of spirit just as much as my body. And where before the accident, I would say I agree. Yeah, we are spirits. But I was very much more focused and aware of the material world, the body, and any of my focus on spirit was like, it was very limited in its actual experience, even if I believed. So now the after effects is that when for the most part anyways, when I'm thinking, making decisions, it has a lot more to do with the values of spirit and the spiritual, world, rather than only, okay, how's this going to affect the material world? How's this going to affect my bank account? How's this going to affect my reputation? That stuff is more on the back burner now.
Yeah. So as having a near-death experience, um, a person obviously there's a shift as you just spoke about, but why do you think it happened? Some people, go through different, as we spoke, traumas and different setbacks in their life to try to shake them up. What do you think the reason was for you to go through this near death experience?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that many people, maybe all people, they have purposes in their life that are not just for them to find their purpose and find their happiness. Purposes that are meant to uplift their environment, uplift humanity that's in touch with them, uplift themselves,
Right.
and evolve into something even bigger and brighter and more vibrant and more beautiful, to bring creations forward, to remember who we are. We all have this, latent in us. We all have these memories and these knowings in us. I feel as though when we're in the body and, we're born here and we're subject to like trauma and we're subject to, ill societies, we can't really access all that stuff because we're often in survival mode,
Right.
and we're often in protection mode, and we're often just focused on our work and our routine. And when a person, at least for myself, has an out of body experience or a near death experience like that, and all of this knowing and memory comes forward of that we are a spirit and there's so much more, it overtakes the priorities of just surviving and just focusing on work and a routine, to the point where it's unmistakable. It's so big and you can't look away from it. So for me, having this expanded experience in the spirit world caused me to come back and think, okay, I want to live life differently. What I've been told by my culture and my society is only part of the story about
Right.
what a human being should be doing. There's so much beyond, money and a career and, a status and um just what we're supposed to do. And we all kind of know this, but when it becomes so obvious and so in your face through one of these types of experiences, you can no longer turn away and go back to your normal thing. And so for myself, I think I needed something really big like that to happen so that I could kind of bring the material world and the spiritual world into more of a balance and not be so focused on the material world only.
Yeah, it's also the opportunity then to share your story with other people and be a person in who's experienced something to then pass on the information firsthand. So many people have these different types of experiences, and they're usually, from me speaking to different people who have near-death experiences, they're on the wrong path, career path. They're not operating from their soul's plan or what their soul is actually craving for or needs. And in terms of your experience of having this accident, and the main theme is almost your surrendering,
Yeah.
maybe teaching surrendering, because as you said, the person next to you didn't go through the same experience and didn't have the same type of NDE or travel to this realm of higher consciousness, so to speak. So for yourself, as you speak, it's very interesting because to me it seems like a sense of maybe you could talk about surrender.
Yeah. Surrender is something that I would say before this accident, I would have, if you had asked me about this, I would have said, oh, well, that's probably a good thing. That's probably the best thing somebody could do. But I didn't have any experience really doing that. Um, Obviously, we all have moments in life where we're faced with things that are out of our control. So we don't have any choice but to surrender. But, beyond that kind of
Right.
stuff, it wasn't in my, it wasn't in my awareness. Um, so I would say my first real act of surrender was in that car accident. And to this day, I don't know why I reacted like that, because it was such a split second. I didn't have time to kind of like, okay, what am I going to do here? I did know, I did know from ambulance training that babies and drunk people survive car accidents at a much higher rate because they're already in a surrendered state. So I did kind of have that awareness and that knowing. And I'm pretty sure I've heard somewhere, like that when someone is preparing to die, that dying peacefully, is the goal. That's what hospice companions and workers try and help people to do. So I had that knowing. Maybe that's why. So yeah, so the car accident was my first, okay, I am going to consciously choose to surrender in this split second because there's something that's happening that's out of my control. And then afterwards, like I guess in the first few months anyway, I would have thought that was just a one-time thing. Maybe I'll do it again when I really die. Whatever.
Yeah.
But then in the months and years that have happened since the car accident, I've noticed that I would say spirit, the great spirit that is leading us through life, has brought me to or shown me many other areas where this can be used. So what I thought was a one-time thing has kind of become a practice. The next times that I got to practice this, and I didn't really plan on it, but it happened. In, I would say, the 3 years since the car accident, I did a lot of self-healing, group healing work with ayahuasca and ceremonies that were, guided by responsible and trained people. And when I started going to the ceremonies to work on my healing, and not healing from the car accident, but early childhood trauma that I'd started to become more aware of, I came to understand that being in those types of ceremonies can actually cause a lot of insecurity and a lot of fear and a lot of challenging feelings in that healing process. And so when I would find myself in these ceremonies, really, really in a difficult place, and the more that I kind of contracted and resisted and tried to push away difficult feelings, I learned in the ceremony that they actually got bigger. Because when we're in altered states of consciousness in plant medicine, everything's expanded and amplified for the purpose of teaching us, like, okay, you're not going to forget this, we're going to make it really big. So when I would resist fear, when I would resist shame or guilt or any of these big feelings that would surface, I noticed that they would just get way bigger. And so I would kind of like be sitting with it and like, now it's even bigger. I'm resisting. It's getting worse and almost like it's going to swallow me. Obviously, my resistance and my trying to distract myself is not the answer because it's only getting worse. People say, oh, what you resist persists.
Right.
Well, yes, it does. So then after who knows how long of sitting in this very uncomfortable ceremony with things just getting worse, eventually something would click in and be like, hey, remember the resource of surrender. Like, let's try that now.
Was that a voice? Was that a voice?
It was just my inner memory. It wasn't like an audible voice. It wasn't a vision. It was like a benevolent remembrance that maybe the Great Spirit was bringing to me in that moment.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And so my reaction after like many minutes, who knows how long of contracting and resisting, would be to like, oh, I'm going to slow my breathing. I'm going to lean back into my pillow, try and relax my muscles and say, I obviously don't have control of these emotions in this moment. I'm going to let go and I'm going to surrender as they pass through. And every time that I would do that, not only would they pass through, not only would they kind of like pass through, dissolve, something really beautiful would happen in the ceremony. It would be like going from like the depths of this despair and the pits of hell to some of the most beautiful visions, some of the most beautiful bodily sensations that I have ever experienced in my life. And in reflection now, I know that I couldn't have moved into those beautiful realms had I not activated this way of surrender. So in ceremony, I've had to bring forth surrender. And then in waking life, when things are not going my way, or there's like a big surprise that I'm saying this is a really negative surprise, where in the past I probably would have been more A, resistant, B, like making a bunch of phone calls and trying to control other people and getting really angry on the phone, like all this stuff that's non-surrender. Now in day-to-day life, more and more, I'm not perfect, but more and more, I'm choosing that path of surrender in real life, in the ceremony of life. And that's kind of where I'm at and where I want to go.
Seems like that journey is from the heart, from the brain to the heart, almost the heart opening, that we resist, of the energy actually opening our heart to actually feel the sensations of the heart chakra expansion. And maybe that's the surrendering, that surrendering, I guess, for a woman to the feminine or a man to the feminine, and not holding on to the masculinity, that full sense of masculinity. Interestingly, I wonder maybe you could talk a little bit about your background in terms of your childhood, how this played in on some of the way you interpreted some of your experiences.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because I feel like our childhoods hold a lot of the keys, even if they were very difficult, hold a lot of the keys to our expansion and our evolution. And I know that that's what it has become for me, but I didn't always think of it like that. So, like many other people, I had some pretty traumatic experiences in my early childhood. And although I grew up in a home that was very physically safe and my physical needs were met, for whatever reason, a lot of my inner experiences were very traumatic. And I was always a pretty sensitive child. Looking back at the time, I just thought everybody felt the way that I did. But looking back, I was actually a pretty sensitive child to criticism, to yelling, to all these kind of um yeah, to any harsh things. And one of the big memories that came back to me for my healing through some of these ceremonies was a period of time when I was 3 years old. I would say this was my first kind of traumatic experience and also psychic opening. And I had blocked it out actually up until, I don't know, my mid 30s. Totally blocked it out. I could remember our house, I could remember our bedroom, but any other memories from that period of my life had become very blocked out and hazy. And I always kind of wondered, like, why don't I remember anything from my childhood? And there's a reason why, yeah, there's a reason why we block certain things out, because they were traumatic, and thinking about them and feeling them over and over before we're ready really isn't serving us. So it's actually a protection mechanism if a person has blocked out a lot from their childhood. Sometimes these traumatic memories come back to us when we're older because we're ready, we're safe enough in our field, our container, to make sense of them and face them. So when I was 3, I lived in an older house, and the memory that came back to me was that many nights I would wake up in the middle of the night after everybody was asleep from a series of nightmares, an ongoing pattern of nightmares, where when I did wake up, I could see in my bedroom with my physical eyes, not just in my third eye, but in my physical eyes, I could still see the spirit world, and I could see the beings that were in my nightmares that were troubling to me. And the presence of them, not just the visual of them, but the presence of them is what was so traumatic for me. So to compare their presence, I'd say, like, often my mom would kind of stomp around the house, scream at my dad. She was an unsettling presence. And I would give her, at the time, as a 3-year-old, a 5 out of 10, as far as like 10 being like super intense presence. But these beings, they were beyond her. They were beyond any physical threat that I had experienced in my short life so far. They were up at like a 9, maybe a 9.5. to be in their presence. They were giving off something, some sort of power that to me at the time was absolutely terrifying. Even though I was not a bedwetter, I I had like, I had become 3, I was toilet trained, but I would suddenly have to pee. And instead of running to the bathroom, I would wet the bed because these beings were all around me and I was too frightened to try and get to the bathroom and past them.
Wow.
And so this started, kind of like a routine of waking up, dealing with them and wetting the bed that I knew if I tell my parents this story, they're just going to think I'm crazy. Like I had that awareness even at a young age that this was not typical and wouldn't be understood. So I was in this alone, really. And the years that followed, this kind of like went away. I didn't wake up to these beings, after I was 4 or 5. But what remained was being able to sense if they were in a place or something of that nature was in a place. So I could go to old houses and certain rooms. I was like, I'm not going in there. I'm not going in there. It's not just an idea in my head. I can physically and palpably feel the presence of something that's triggering the same thing in me. Sometimes even I'd be walking in the forest, walking outside, and not in my backyard. It was often in forest areas. And it wasn't quite as scary, but I could still feel the presence of beings. And in kind of like after the fact, they were probably just elemental beings that weren't necessarily out to scare anyone, but just the power of feeling an invisible being and not really knowing is enough to scare a child. And in more of like the darker side of things, I had a lot of experiences where I would look in a mirror and I would get a flashback to what's probably a past life where um where I was doing some sort of a ritual, maybe like even a dark ritual or something that had to do with the dark magic, that involved a mirror and rituals and incantations. And so these flashbacks from my past lives of experiences that I had had kept coming to me as a child and just really frightening me because the vibration of them was pretty powerful. And so, yeah, so my childhood traumas, they didn't involve a lot that had to do with, like direct abuse from caregivers. They had to do with what I was experiencing in my inner world. And made me probably into a highly sensitive person or an empath as an
Yeah.
adult.
Yeah, I would say that most of the experiences we have are all really setting us up for a true, like again, our life's purpose. And so maybe facing the dark side of life and then knowing how to help people who experience the same types of traumas or energies that exist. The interesting thing is that you were able to feel it and know it. I know myself as a sensitive person growing up, I'd feel the energies, the unspoken words that were going on in the room, and not being able to decipher, understand it, and act out, so to speak, and then become aggressive or like build a wall around myself until I realized that it was a gift, and that I was experiencing. And from your perspective, did the near death experience heighten the sensitivities that you had, or did it evoke stronger feelings of psychic ability or intuition or premonitions?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely did. So all this that I was describing about being a child and sensing into this stuff, it eventually kind of subsided when I got to be like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10. I was still more shy, more reserved, and a sensitive person. But as far as the psychic realms, I was very much more landed in my body at that point. And that does often happen to kids, is they get more into the material world. Uh, Fast forward to the near death experience. Yeah, most of my life was like pretty grounded in the material world, and then this car accident happened, and I didn't notice this right away. It wasn't like a night and day thing. But in the months following the car accident, I slowly started to notice that changes were happening in the way that I was perceiving myself and the world around me and the invisible world. Some of the things that I remember kind of in that first year there. was if I heard someone tell a story about, say, a psychic experience, an out of body experience that they had, I could immediately not only believe them, but I could tune into what they were saying. So if they're telling me, oh, this story happened to me, these are the details, I could listen to them and I could almost feel in my own body everything that they went through. And I could also kind of tell if the person was lying or if they were exaggerating, just in general in life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There was kind of a feeling that was coming off of their words, or I could sense even into the tone of their words that, okay, this part of the conversation is true. But then when they talked about this, there was a subtle change in the tone of their voice, and there's some deception there. And so as I'm listening now and being part of conversations, it's starting to get really overwhelming because when before I would just kind of take things at face value, okay, whatever, the person said this, no big deal, there's no feeling about it. Now I'm like, whoa, that's really true. Whoa, that's deceptive. So conversations even are starting to get so overwhelming because the amount of information and data that's coming at me
Right.
is huge. And this isn't even like psychic phenomenon. This is literally just like day-to-day information. So that's the first thing that I noticed. Another thing that I noticed started to happen would be that in the 24-hour period before an event, and it didn't even have to be a big event, just maybe even like a day-to-day thing, I would get like a flash picture of something either in my mind. It wouldn't be big and intrusive. It would just be kind of like my imagination would show me a random picture, or I'd have a dream at night that seemed random at the time. And then within 24 to 48 hours, I would be actually having that event in real life down to like the details, the colors, the movements of whatever I saw in that mental picture or that dream. So it's interesting because it's not like, oh, you're given this message from the spirit world and now you've got what you need to prepare for that thing. It hasn't even been like that. It's literally like, um, I saw it before it happened and I didn't even care, but now it's happening. So I kind of care. So the concept of time and seeing things coming before they come, the volume on that got turned up. And I mean, it had become so innocent as like, I had a dream, I guess this was last year. I had a dream of like an eagle, really vivid, circling above my head. It was a small eagle as far as I could tell. Woke up, kind of forgot about the dream, went about my day. And then I went for a run and I was with a friend and I hadn't seen any birds, like predator birds in the area before. And I looked up and there's what looks like a young eagle circling above my
Wow,
head,
wow, wow, wow.
really pretty high up, but circling above my head. And I stopped him because I was in Tanzania and I wasn't familiar with the birds there. And I said, is that an eagle? Do you have eagles here? And he said, no, it's not an eagle, but it's like a very similar species. It's a predator bird that doesn't grow as big as an eagle. That's a fully grown, whatever kind of bird this was. I was like, interesting. And then later on the run, we found a feather from that bird that was very similar to an eagle feather, like almost identical. So it was probably a species of eagle. So whatever. These are some of the things that started to creep in. And then just like about intuition in general, I started to make a lot more connections. So where in the past where I would, maybe meet somebody, I didn't see any red flags or I was refusing to look at them. Now I would actually have a feeling in my body, kind of like a range of, okay, this is kind of this person's intentions in this moment. This is how close I should get to this person. This is how much I should connect with them. They're not maybe good or bad, but this is what's going to be best going forward. Where in the past, I would again take things at more at face value and trying to think the best of people, um, which is one way to be. But I didn't have that intuition about people. Um, yeah, those are some of the things that changed for sure afterwards.
So was it more intense at a certain point, or has it leveled off, or is it on the same level as it was when it was at its peak?
Yeah, I would say it peaked. I struggled to come back into my body. I struggled to not have my awareness of all these like invisible ideas, invisible communications that were coming at me. There was a couple of years there where I felt so bombarded, but not in a negative way. It was interesting at all this data and information that was coming at me. And so I was taking my attention away from my responsibilities in the physical world and being very curious about the things that I was noticing and learning that were coming from these invisible realms. And during that time, it was very peaked because where we put our attention and awareness, that's what gets bigger in our life. So at times it was very exciting. But then what would start to suffer were my responsibilities and my tending to things in the physical world. And so it's been a process of kind of coming back into the body. And what's meant by that is like bringing the focus back to things that have to do with the material world and the body.
Right.
And so with that, some of these perceptions, some of these like psychic awarenesses are turned down a little bit. And that's kind of what I was concerned about. If I bring my attention and my awareness back to the material world, am I going to lose my connection with this other world? And the answer is no.
Right.
And in fact, the answer is the things that do show up as far as information and intuitions coming at me are actually the ones that are the most useful. So instead of getting useful things and lots of abstract ideas and being just like overwhelmed by all of it, it's like, okay, yeah, there's abstract ideas. I could probably go find them, if I take a little bit of a retreat or something. But what's able to kind of come through now as I'm bringing myself more back into the body are things that actually matter here and now in the physical world.
Yeah. So it's such an interesting, inspirational story. The ability to go through an experience and to have the insight and the awareness to take back this information and use it in your everyday life, and to actually be in touch with parts of yourself that you left behind and connect them to your adult self now, and bringing a sense of wholesomeness to your person. The thing is that many people's relationships suffer, and then other types of friendships go down the drain, or we no longer connect to people on an energetic level. We no longer connect to people who we once connected to, and now we realize that sometimes the isolation or the emptiness of those relationships fulfilled maybe being alone and feeling lonely, but also feeling a sense of, I guess, truth with ourselves, or the authenticity of being who we really are. How has your work how has your experience helped other people in terms of what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's become a little bit more important to me. At first, it was really all about, whoa, what just happened? I don't even feel like the same person. I'm not interested in the same stuff. How do I even deal with this? And I wasn't able really at all to focus on anybody else. I mean, if someone was like in a crisis, I could, show up and support them. But for the most part, my awareness was like, whoa, I need to figure this out for me. And yeah, although I don't have it all figured out and I'm still integrating it, it's now kind of come to a point where um, I, the greatest joy and the greatest kind of feelings of purpose that I have now have to do with what I can do to serve the Great Spirit, what I can do to serve the earth, and what I can do to serve the brothers and sisters that come my way, that are, just looking for some insight or some support, or just knowing that they're not alone on the path of a spiritual awakening, which can be pretty shattering and jarring. And so now I it brings me, yeah, the greatest joy to be able to connect with people who are experiencing some of those shattering things for their first time, or what feels like the first time for them. And intending to be the type of person that I needed, or I would have appreciated when I was experiencing those things for the first time.
Right.
And I do believe that there's a lot of gifts in and importance in experiencing some of those things alone, because that's where we get our strength and our footing. Sometimes we have to go a lot of these tough things alone. And then at the same time, debriefing and learning and gaining support from people who have experienced them before is also important. There's like a real balance there. So nowadays, it's really important for me, and I think for anybody who has been walking this path, to be available with any information, any wisdom, any tips that they have picked up along their way. I think that's part of this cycle. And there have been some really beautiful people that showed up for me in my darkest moments. And for the rest of my life now, my intention is to emulate those people because of the impact that they had on me. And the experiences, like you said, aloneness, you said loneliness is a part of the path. That's a really, really important piece that once you find yourself in these very alone places, it can feel like a primordial like separation from everything that's good, everyone that's good. You can feel very misunderstood by those around you who haven't experienced some of these shattering pieces of spiritual awakening. And knowing that actually that aloneness and those lonelinesses that we walk through end up becoming our greatest trainers, teachers, and allies. Just knowing that
Yep.
is really big. So often when I am in touch with people who are experiencing these things, and they often do bring up that sense of real isolation and loneliness, and don't see a way out, like don't know when it's going to end, don't know if it's permanent, to walk through waves of that. And that does come back in waves for me anyways, but it's not permanent. And now I know that when it shows up, it's going to be temporary. And by the time it's over, there's going to be some massive gifts, some massive gems and treasures that are able to be taken from it, and a stronger standing on our own 2 feet in trust of the Great Spirit and in trust of our ability to keep walking. So yeah, so nowadays it's very, very important for my own integration and my own healing, to come alongside other people who are walking the same path.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that you have on your website, which is it says weird is wonderful and quirks are divine and oddities are key to discovering our miraculous nature, which is a very interesting thing because we could only find that quirkiness by being alone and by spending the time with ourselves and going on that path. And sometimes the experiences we have to go to certain extents or extremes in order for us to find us in that place of surrendering, as you did. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about your website, the name of it,
Yeah,
and
sure.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's www.lionspiritcoaching.com. And yeah, what I do, you can, if you're looking for some coaching, you can book an appointment there. What I do really is it's usually people who are experiencing a spiritual awakening, and they're just looking for a little bit of coaching and support along the way. And also a lot of people that contact me are highly sensitive people, empathic people that are working on getting stronger and working on their boundaries, working on their self-esteem, self-confidence, so that they can bring these beautiful gifts of high sensitivity and intuition to the world. So yeah, those are mostly the people that I work with and coach. And because of my childhood trauma and then my training as a trauma coach, I'm totally open to working with people who are feeling and experiencing symptoms of post trauma along the way. That's really normal. I
Right.
like to normalize that's just yeah, that's just our bodies readjusting and reacting and trying to heal.
It's interesting. I mean, I heard, when we go down the rabbit hole of information, of not only working on ourselves, but then going down the rabbit hole of understanding the universe. I heard in another interview where you spoke about the planet Sirius and your connection to that. And I think many people who go on this path are then interested in UFOs and UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, and our connection to the universe itself. And, the more we focus on something, as you said before, the more things come to its fruition. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about your connection to some type of, planetary connection that has guided you possibly.
Yeah. I'm glad that you asked about that, because there's so many stories out there, so many channelers, there's so much information, and it can be hard to know like what's what. I can only speak from my experience, and that is star nations, interplanetary information. That was never something I was interested in. I was never someone who, watched fantasy or futuristic stuff. So I'm coming from a place of like a pretty typical Western woman. And so my first awareness that there is stuff like that going on, and it can be very real for someone, was in one of my ayahuasca ceremonies. And actually, this ceremony specifically was the ceremony where I spoke about really, really needing to dip into surrender in a physical way, in a mental way, and then everything opening up, a lot opening up as a result of that. So yeah, I'm in the ceremony, I relax into my pillow, I slow my breathing, I start to move into a place of surrender, and that heavy, dark, terrifying sensation that I was dealing with, it fizzles away. It absolutely dissolves in the energy of surrender. The next thing that I notice is that everything turns quite bright. Everything becomes almost sparkly, glowing, dazzling, and I'm at peace. My body is physically changing. This is important because when we're sensing, yeah, I'll just kind of take a spot here to say, when we're sensing, if you're a bit psychic, you're kind of developing these abilities into other realities, whether it's angels, ascended masters, beings from other planets. If we are not really in touch with our feeling discernment, we can kind of go down rabbit holes. We can go in directions that might have a mix of truth and falsehood. Our discernment really needs to be purified. And on this path, that's something that I'm learning. But one way we can, one way that we can kind of have a better knowing of the level and the vibration and the intention of beings that we're contacting is being present in the body. And so let's say interdimensional being might come to a person in a ceremony, in a meditation, in a dream, that might look dazzling or beautiful or interesting and have, flattering things to say and messages that sound really amazing. But then they might also not have good intentions. They might just be that, like a deceiving kind of, not trying to hurt you, but just not quite a high level. And in the body, if we can get really in touch with the discernment of the body and how beings make us feel on earth, like I said, like a human being walks in the room and you can kind of just get a feel for them and their intentions, then you're going to be really well prepared for encountering beings in the spirit world too, because it's the exact same skills that we need.
Right.
there. There's no difference. So yeah, so I'm in this tight place. Back to the story. I'm in this tight place, and then it opens up, and I'm noticing my body itself is starting to really relax, to feel really safe, and to feel like, yeah, this is more right. This is a feeling of love and balance and acceptance and understanding. I don't feel super overwhelmed by any emotions specifically. This is a good place to be. Whether I'm on earth, this is a good place to be. And whether I'm in a spirit space, this is a good place to be. Okay. And then what opened up for me was many different visions. Most of it was kind of the nature of seeing a lot of sacred geometry, seeing planets. Now, this ceremony was on the Lion's Gate, the 8-8. And so, yeah, it definitely opened up some awareness that portal would open up. So this was like a pretty special night on the calendar too.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see, it was like I was suspended with stars around me, and I could see a lot of things that I ended up realizing later. Oh, these are zodiac figures. So I'm looking at the sky around me, and I'm seeing kind of like lines connecting different stars, and then a character from the zodiac, which I'm not familiar with astrology. Like, this was not my thing. But then what would happen after, those lines connect and you see that figure from the zodiac, it started to come to an awareness. Like, it had eyes, it had a personality, it had wisdom, it had a specific essence to it where I could look at it and kind of perceive it and get a real feel, again, with my discernment, with my body, and with telepathy. This is the nature of this zodiac sign. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so these like pictures that we see of like Aquarius and all this stuff,
Right.
it's so much more than that. That's like a flat two-dimensional version of what these things actually are. They're beings that are suspended in time and space, and as they move around like the zodiac clock throughout the calendar year, we are, as human beings, their field, their knowledge, their wisdom, their attributes are affecting ours.
Wow.
And, it could go down a rabbit hole of like, okay, based on when you're born, how much you're connecting with a certain transit and all that kind of stuff.
Right,
Anyway,
right,
I'm
right.
an astrologer.
Yeah.
But I want to say that these astrological figures around the zodiac, they're energies that are very real. And the cool thing about the energy that was coming off of them was that it wasn't like frightening or scary. And it also wasn't like fully loving and benevolent. It was literally like ancient wisdom and information that could inform me more about myself. So if I took my awareness and I focused in on like a certain sign of the zodiac, because I could see them all, I could understand more about the attributes of that specific one. And then I got to thinking, okay, is this how the ancient people even came up with this? Through visionary experiences,
Wow, wow,
learned
wow.
what they needed to learn, recorded it. Okay, I'm starting to get it. And not only that, I could start to see, again, I was not into tarot. This is not my thing, but the archetypes of the tarot started to also be moving in the same kind of rotation as these zodiac signs, and they would line up. So I could start to see how a certain archetype, like say, the high priestess, lines up with Pisces, and how that's a different representation. I think it's Pisces. That's a different representation, but the same energies. But okay, this is how this all works. And again, when I would see an archetype from the tarot moving in front of me, at first it would look like a tarot card. But then the more I focused on it, it was like, for example, the high priestess, she's looking back at me. She's looking back at me like I'm looking at an angel or a human or someone with a personality. I'm not alone here.
Wow.
And I'm kind of
Wow.
like, whoa. And
Yeah.
again, there's that power coming,
Yeah.
not good, not bad, but that feeling of power coming off of her. And so if I wanted to kind of stay with her in focus, all I had to do was sit there and feel what was coming off of her as far as understanding what she represents and what she offers to us, and the parts of me that I share with her, because
Yeah.
all of these things, they're just powerful energies outside of time and space that are actually part of us. We're like reflections of them. We're all doing this together. They're not like, yes, they're kind of like above us as far as they're not lost in the
Yeah.
forgetfulness of Earth. So this is kind of like what happened before I encountered these beings from what seemed like Sirius. So I'm kind of like learning a little bit about the energy of the zodiac. And I'm sure there was so much more. This just kind of seemed like me kind of getting my bearings of this is how it all works. And to be honest, also a remembering. Like I feel like most of us, especially most of us on this path, have lived lifetimes where we were in general communicating with these energies, having these visions on the regular.
Right.
You know, back when magic was a little bit more pronounced on the earth and we were less in density, that less in the material world. So I'm like, I've been here before.
Yes,
And
yes.
I actually know a lot more about this stuff than I can remember now. And I kind of want to remember. And I think that's some of our hunger to learn these things is because we've known them before, but in this incarnation, we can't remember.
They have to remain dormant.
They have to remain dormant for a reason because
Yeah.
maybe we're not purified and responsible enough to be, you know,
Yeah.
to be wielding these kind of information. Anyway, so after this kind of period of time observing and feeling the zodiac and some of these archetypes, and it was just before the medicine started to wear off. I was in the presence of 4 or 5 that looked like humans, but almost like humans from a movie, humans from a fantasy movie, humans that were outside of space and time. In my vision, they happened to be tall, a little bit taller than me, a little bit thinner than me. They had an ancient look to them, as though they had, I would say, they had seen things and parts of history that were before anything that's been recorded on this earth. There was just kind of like that knowing coming off of them. They all had kind of like long hair. It looked like they'd never cut their hair. They had like a kind of like a sparkly, glowing nature to them. And at first I was like, oh, like, how do I know that these aren't false light beings? How do I know that I'm not being deceived somehow? It feels really amazing to be in their presence, but how do I know? And looking back, I don't believe that they were false light or deceptive beings simply because they weren't trying to flatter me. They weren't trying to control me, and they weren't trying to kind of like lead me into like, I'm going to give you this message that you need to channel for humanity. All they were was sharing with me their essence. They were just sharing with me their presence and the feeling that was in their heart. Okay, and so they were all wearing like long navy, not the exact same, but kind of like these long navy gowns that had like little stars, little moons that were kind of glowing. It was like their clothes had these little glowing spots. The one man that seemed to be like the leader or the guide, he kind of looked like a cosmic version of Gandalf. He had a tall staff, and on top of it was like a crystal. And I think most important from this vision was one of the women that was standing with him had almost the identical face as I have in this life. It was
Wow.
me, but it was me from a different period of time or from a different dimension. My hair was different. My body was a little different. My clothing was different. It was a version of myself that had a lot more knowing. It had the knowing of the eons because outside of time, in that dimension that they were in, was kind of colliding with a temporary dimension that I was in. If I had to guess, I would say I was maybe in the 6th dimension that was kind of like merging with the 7th, and they were coming down from like 7th or 8th in this temporary meeting with me through the ayahuasca and through the 8-8 portal, because I've drank a lot of ayahuasca and nothing like this has happened in the other ceremonies.
Wow.
So in this like maybe 5 minutes that we had together, I was looking at this version of myself, who was able from that 7th or 8th dimensional awareness to have in her kind of like the timelines and the histories of Earth, of the planets, of eons before recorded history on Earth, perhaps before, I would say probably before humans were living on Earth. And I say Sirius not because they even telepathically told me that. it was almost just like a knowing, oh, this is a version of me from Sirius.
Wow.
These are my
Wow.
friends. These are my family. I'm getting chills saying this. These are ones who know me outside of this earth. They know me outside of my struggles. They know me outside of my insecurities and inadequacies and my forgetfulness. And they've come to support me in this moment just by being present, reminding me that this version of me on earth is only like one slice of the pie of me, small slice,
Right.
and that there is a version of me that knows so much more than what I do here. And so, yeah, in that 5 or so minutes, it was literally like a silent communication of love, a silent communication of remember there's more to who you are
Right.
and more to who we are. I'm speaking now, like for the
Yes.
sake of other humans that are watching this.
Yes. Yes.
We
Absolutely.
all have these versions of us outside of space and time. And really trust me on this, because this experience, and I will say this last thing about the ceremony, and it was different than the other ones in that when these visions started, when that kind of like bright light opened up and the planets, the weirdest thing happened. Like I could very barely feel the kind of like intoxication or the altered state of consciousness that ayahuasca typically brings.
Wow.
It was like poof,
You were
all
out
of
of it.
that was gone. I'm also not on earth and not so aware of the ceremony space, but I'm fully lucid. For some reason, I've been allowed to not be so altered and woozy and dreamlike in order that I bring back a very clear vision. So I don't know if it was like a different mix of plants in the ayahuasca brew. Like some people have suggested to me that there was like a different substance in there that can make this happen. That's possible. Or it was like literally a benevolent gift from the Great Spirit so that I could remember everything. Yeah. And so, yeah, after that 5 or so minutes of just like being in the loving, accepting presence of this spiritual family from another space and time, yeah, the medicine fully wore off. I was fully sober. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel, altered. I was literally sitting in the ceremony space before the ceremony was over, being like, okay, if I never drink any more medicine or attend another ceremony, I'm good. I'm good to go.
Wow. 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 It's amazing. Yeah. I'm glad I asked that question because it's such an interesting story. And it's interesting because so many people have dreams, contacts, sightings, and they have a connection to other planetary beings, as you speak about. Uh, in fact, myself, I've had dreams over the last month or so of ships coming by with lights, pink and blue lights flashing and calling my name from above. And I saw a spaceship. I saw a UFO about 2 years ago over the beach. It came about 300, 400 feet above me, and I saw it and it took off. So I've been witnessing different types of phenomenon. Then I had a blue light explode over the car on the highway in the middle of winter. It looked like a Roman candle, but it was some type of message. Yeah. So I have that interest myself, that connection. I hear, I understand the expansion of where we can go, and the frustration that the body and the lessons of life contain us in, so that we, have to be patient to wait our turn, so to speak, to land the plane and have the runway open. Is there anything that you can leave the audience and myself with, something of inspiration from your experiences?
Yeah. I would say a lot of people who want to have more experiences like these ones that we're talking about, psychic phenomena, other planets, all that kind of stuff. Um, that's that's like our soul wanting to remember parts of us that are really beautiful, parts of our past. And I really understand that longing now, especially after some of these experiences that I talked about here. And there's no like shortcut. Sometimes people have these, like you said, like a sighting of a UFO or these lights over your car, these are like benevolent acts of grace. So, going to look for it, that may or may not work. But, I encourage people that are really longing for this home, that seems so far away, um, to put out your intention to the Great Spirit and just say, I miss my soul family. I miss that home in the heart of being fully understood and known beyond just this life. I want to remember. Show me what I'm not seeing. Show me more of who I am. And putting out that prayer, putting that out that intention, and coming from a real humble heart space. Um, that's what I would say to anybody who's kind of, feeling that. And then also it's important to for as far as like psychic phenomena, one of the most important things that's not talked a lot about in this community is purification. Is we want to have really good discernment so that we are connecting with the highest possible level beings if we are visited. And purification means, basically coming at life from a really humble, heart-centered place, being okay with whatever happens, being fine looking at our shadow parts and going through those purifications when we are triggered. Those are the best ways for long-term good fruit to come from out of body psychic dream experiences. And that part's not talked about because that's kind of like not the sexy part of
Yeah.
things, but that is very, very important on this path. So yeah, that's what I would say about some of the psychic stuff. And then just in general, kind of coming back to the near death out of body stuff, I always like to say, and it's again a reminder to myself too, is that in an instant, as we know, our lives can be taken from us, whether it's a freak accident or even the life that we know can be taken from us through like an injury or a disability. So really getting clear with ourselves on what do I want to experience in this life? What are the gifts that want to come forward in me? Even if it's not like today, but before I die. And where am I really wasting time on things that aren't going to matter at the end of my life? Because I feel like part of the message that is important for me to always share is that your life can be demanded from you at any moment. And there can be a lot of regret if you find yourself in a dying process and you haven't really taken advantage of some of those ideas and some of those gifts that have been given to you for earth. And so I wouldn't want anyone to stay in their same routine that they've been doing forever, that's no longer serving them, in relationships that are toxic, that are no longer serving them, and ignoring their creative inspirations that are coming from the Great Spirit and want to be actualized in this world. To hold on a little less tightly to our material things, to of course appreciate and honor and respect the beautiful material things that we're given in our relationships with other people, but to hold a little less tightly to those things, because we're not going to take them with us. What we're going to take with us is our essence of innocence and purity and love. So what are we doing with our time on earth that is enhancing that innocence and purity and love? That is really what's going to matter at the end of all this.
Well, I want to thank you for these beautiful and inspiring words because it's definitely heartfelt from me personally, but I know other people as well. And a lot of people get stuck in their lives in a state of ego and a state of materialism and control. And sometimes hearing someone's story and the diversity, the both sides of the journey of how a person gets to this place and the authenticity, then maybe people are moved and contemplate certain things in their lives as you speak about with regards to not living their true purpose or not valuing life by taking advantage of the qualities that they possess individually and using those qualities or those talents to their utmost, or at least at some point in life, as you said, fulfilling them, which is important. So I want to thank you for joining me and for giving me this opportunity to talk with you. It was very inspiring for me, and maybe we'll talk again in the future.
Yeah, I would be totally open to that. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you, Amanda.